Thank, thank you, Ms. Kavita. I would want to first and foremost thank Mr. Subramaniam of ISSS team for giving me the platform to talk about in a webinar about DORA. The disclaimer is that as the introduction was done, even though I know a little bit on security and privacy, I'm not an expert in DORA because this is pretty new. It's 2 years in the market. So I've collected the information from the DORA framework, and I'm trying to give you an overall what probably could be an impact for organization which is established either in the EU or organization which is actually providing support to the financial entities in the EU. It could be from different countries as well, maybe India as well, right? So I've got about 15 slides, which I'll try and cover in the next 45 minutes. And I thought I'll slate 15 minutes for question and answer. But if you want to stop me for question in between, definitely you can stop so that the other participant in this forum will also get benefited by those questions. I will try and answer most of the questions if possible. And if I'm not able to answer any of them, I will try and get those answers and route it through Ms. Kavita. Having said that, I really want to thank everybody. I know it could have been a long day for everybody, but really thanks for people who have decided to stay in this webinar. Having said that, the acronym for DORA is the expansion is Digital Operational Resilience, framework, which is an act actually by the European Union. So I'm going to give an overview of the regulation of this. This regulation was formulated by the European Union, and it applies to all the financial entities, in the European Union. Financial entities, namely, it could be the bank, the investment firms, it could be insurance, it could be trading. Anybody who is actually doing financial services for their customer, for their client, they would probably get directly under the supervision of EU under the DORA Act. Not only that, it also applies to the critical service partners or critical service provider like IT service providers and so on and so forth, which I will cover in the subsequent slides. You may be asking questions, why is that I'm covering if this is only, probably eligible for the European Union, financial entities? That is not the case, but anybody in the critical infrastructure services, IT services, or they call it as ICT, Information and Communication Technology, any partners who's operating outside of the European Union will also be impacted, or rather to say, they will also have to conform to this regulation, stipulated by the European Union. Even though the DORA Act started in 16 January 2023, they had given sizable amount of time for organization, particularly the financial entities and the critical service provider, to implement those controls that is required to comply with the regulation. And the deadline for all the organizations, such organizations which has been identified to comply with DORA, shall be the 17th of January 2027. So probably it's hardly 60 days from now. It is very essential for organizations if who are offering services to the financial entities. If they are not aware of it, they need to get their act fast. It is not that easy to comply. It's a long drawn process, but they could start somewhere rather than unduly getting fined by the regulatory authority of the European Union, right? As much as any regulatory requirements, whether it is PCI DSS or HIPAA or HITRES or FedRAMP, the risk assessment is equally important in the DORA framework. And there is a lot of emphasis on the risk assessment and risk management when it comes to the cybersecurity risk and the financial risk. So this is the key that the DORA framework expects all the organizations to perform and have it documented and produce it to them as and then it's demanded. So there's a lot of high importance given on risk management. Similarly, the incident reporting is given equal importance. So any organization which directly or indirectly have got impacted either by cyber espionage or cyber threats, or by the disruption through the IT network, like a regular disruption. If they do not have a proper resilience in place, they may have a disruption. Those disruptions would have to be also reported in a form of a clear incident reporting. Once again, there is a mandate that has been derived by DORA, what needs to be reported. So two major exercises that organization would have to implement. This includes the financial entity as well as the critical IT service providers as well. The definitions here that we need to bear in mind while we are going through the high-level overview of the DORA is that they talk about operational resilience. Of course, this is nothing but your ISO. We are talking about the DR and BCP program. But wherein in DORA, they talk about, they coin it as resilience, more or less the same. But this has got a penalty imposed if you do not, follow the regulation, right? The act. So they would want to identify, understand what is that is critical for your organization, and then you need to have a timely response. So that's the reason why I've underlined those words, is that you need to have a timely response plan and also identify what is critical. If you do not identify or quantify what is critical and within what time frame you will be able to recover or restore, then it's a futile exercise. So that's a very key word that the DORA Act has emphasized. Adding on to the risk assessment as well as on to the incident reporting, this is very, very important that DORA has imposed, is that the third-party risk assessment. There could be a lot of third-party vendors offering services to these financial entities. They may be part of the critical service providers, or they may not be part of the critical service providers. But it is up to the financial entity to ensure that they validate all these service providers and the sub-providers for their capability. How good is their cybersecurity? How good is the privacy? And how good is their resilience? So they in turn would have to evaluate, and the third-party risk assessment, which is getting a lot of momentum in the recent past, and this could be one of the attributes why the third-party risk assessment becomes very, very important in conducting these kind of sessions. So you may ask, to who does this DORA apply? The Digital Operations Resilience Framework, or Act. It applies to, as I said, to the financial entities and critical third-party service providers. The two-pronged approach is that one is that they're talking about disruption of services. It could be flooding. It could be because lack of people, mass absentees, or non-performance of your infrastructure or your communications failure. That could be on the infrastructure side. But having said that, they're also looking into the disruption of services to their clients. It could be the banks and to their clients due to cyber sabotage or cyber espionage or cyber threats or vulnerabilities. Having said that, these are two approaches that they are looking into very seriously and meticulously. Over and above, they are looking at the black swan. There is no black swan, but they are looking at the black swan. Probably people, you would agree with me, when during the time of the COVID in India, specifically in the Tamil Nadu region, there was a classic case that one of the chemical industries near Nellore, if I'm right, near Nellore, they had mass absentees because people couldn't go to work. It was a production plant. I think it was a chemical fertilizer plant. And because some of the valves were to be regulated, and because of mass absenteeism, there was no supervision involved. There was no automation also. And one of the gas tank had a blast and people died. So it was two. One is that you have disruption and fatality, calamity, plus you don't have people. So these are more than one incident that could probably hamper an organization, leading to fatality. So here they are not looking into fatality. Of course, they give a lot of importance to life, but they are not taking to that level because they want to curtail much earlier, making sure that the customers do not suffer both physically or mentally because of lack of resilience methodology by the financial entity. And these DORA regulations is a direct effective on the EU member states. So there is a difference between the I'm sorry, regulation and the directive. DORA is a regulation, and it is applicable to all the member states equally. If it is a directive, then it has to get passed through the parliament and vetted by all the member state. But here, no dilution. It has to be followed by all the member states as it is, as the act is released. So there's no dilution of services. There's no dilution for each member state to dilute it and then make it manageable to their service provider working within that region. It doesn't happen that way. It is uniform across, and that's why it is called as an act. When it comes to the technology company, there is a clear identification saying that the critical ICT third-party service provider, they also come directly under the supervision of the EU. As the direction for the financial entity, there is a direct supervision for the ICT critical third-party service provider, which is providing services to the financial entity. So you have the two eyes. The European Union is actually fairly looking at the financial entity as well as the ICT third-party critical service provider as well. Right, and then who could probably fall into the category of ICT service provider? It could be a cloud service provider, it could be SaaS, it could be outsourcing organization, it could be desktop service provider as low as desktop service provider. It could be your SOC monitoring, SIM SOC monitoring service provider. You could be part of the fraud detection and management services as well. You could be software providers, GRC service providers as well. You could be providing the advisory services to the financial entities as a GRC consulting organization. So you probably get into the ICT service providers as well. Information management, management retention, record retention as well, and then storage solutions, payment solutions as well, then system integrators, collaborative tools. As of this is not an exhaustive list, but you could look into if you're in the similar services, offering services to the financial entity within the European Union, you fall into the category of ICT service provider. The criticality is once again a yardstick that the European Union has got. They perform a quantitative risk analysis as well as the qualitative risk analysis on the critical ICT service provider. And as of now, this is what I was able to read. As of now, they mark the critical service provider as if a service provider is offering services or support in any of these to the financial entity, and if that financial entity cover the market ratio of about 10% of the residents and citizens of the European Union, then you clearly are identified as a critical service provider for the financial entity. So, and if you're offering more than one services, obviously your criticality goes high based on the quantitative and qualitative risks, which the mandate has been set by the European Union Supervisor Authority. So the enforcement responsibility, this is how the hierarchy goes. The European Parliament and Council, I mean, they enforce it to the European Central Bank. When I say Central Bank, it is not only the Central Bank. You have the insurance, you have the depository, you have the the stock exchanges within the European Union. So they all form a consortium, and then they report into the European Supervisor Authority, who have got the ultimate authority to be governing the member states. And the member states will have to look into the National Competent Authority, which then percolates down to the financial entity, then the financial entity have the responsibility and have the liability to ensure that the third-party IT service providers and the critical service providers are validated before they onboard them. And then once again, the third-party service provider would probably have been subcontracting their to other vendors to offer jointly those services to the entities. So if you roll that up, you this is because it's a law, it goes up to the Parliament and Council level. So it is as stringent as that you can imagine. Why this intense slide that's been mentioned here? Because as of now, the European Union has not stipulated a penalty like a fine, just like in European Union GDPR, they have mentioned the fine there 4 million euro or your 20% of your net results, whatever it is, revenue. But here, it is not quantified at the moment because an organization would have to follow multiple framework if you're going to be operating out of the European Union. It could be complying with the European Union GDPR. It could be the EU IT AI Act, if at all you're using any of the AI solution. So at the end of the day, if they find the resilience not that good or due to the non-performance or non-adequacy of the resilience that you have built in, and any of the customer data is out in the public or data exploitation due to cyber attack, then you have your privacy fines as well as non-complying to the DORA Act. So there is a fine. You have a cumulative fine, so they have not quantified it. Of course, it always, just like your EU GDPR, they look into the controls that you have adequately put in place. And even after that, if there is any attack, they would look into those aspects as well. So it clearly says that you need to have the necessary controls and the complementary controls wherever you cannot have the direct controls. So they are going to look into, and they are going to look into this every year. You're supposed to mandate and send the report of all those requirements stated in the DORA Act. And then there could be a third-party assessment either nominated by the EU supervisory authority, or you can do a self-assessment and then submit the report to the EU supervisory authority. And if they find that the report is valid, they may take into consideration. And if they don't find it very encouraging, they have the authority to knock at the doors of the financial entity and may also do another round of audit. So as I initially told you, the regulated entity, the European Union has direct bearing on to the financial entity as well as the critical service provider. And then the financial entity, they may appoint, the ICT third-party service provider may not come into the critical category, but they need to do the risk assessment. Of course, they are third-party, service providers. You have suppliers as well. They also come in and under the liability of the financial entity. Similarly, the ICT service provider who are offering service to the financial entity, they may also engage subcontracting suppliers, to offer service to the financial entity. So at the end of the day, if you look into, they are looking into deep down to the end list of identifying your suppliers who are contributing to the financial entity. So any disruption or non-availability of services when it is needed by the supplier to the service provider and then to this entity, it is the liability of the financial entity to identify through a risk assessment and also do a third-party risk assessment and have them clearly defined, and then find out how long does it take for you to, like the RTO as we generally do it in the DRBCP. So the complexity is there. Even though it is known to everybody, the only key thing is that the penalty is being added, and this has been mandated as a law that everybody would have to follow the law as per the EU DORA Act. Having said that, this is a similar framework that you follow, whether it is in NIST or in ISO. Of course, this is a top-down approach. So the leadership team from the organization, which may probably have a potential impact, they need to have a strong committee established. Of course, it is very difficult because you're talking about multiple compliances if you're in a financial entity. you cannot afford to have multiple committees, but you can probably club them into a single committee. There could be EU GDPR, for ISMS, there could be BCP committee. It is not, you cannot have multiple committees, but you can ensure that a domain expert who knows about DORA, who is working for the organization, can be part of the committee, who can probably take the information to the board and ensure that the compliance are met. So there is an independence given to that person or the group of person who's going to take advantage of the situation and ensure that the compliance are met from the DORA angle as well. The second is that, of course, as I told you, the risk assessment is very, very critical. How often you have to do the risk, if there is going to be a change in the service provider, if you're going to be bringing in new service provider, or if there is a service provider who have got an impact through cyber espionage, or because of their resilience was not adequate, you may have to do the risk assessment. And whenever there is a change in the program, in the organization, you may have to do. Whenever there is a change in the parameter of your resilience, you may have to do the risk assessment. And then, of course, you need to do a continuous monitoring. Monitoring is something that comes across in like this ISO framework plan, do, check, act. This is similar. Here, the monitoring is also equally important because you need to check for any addendum that is released in the DORA Act, so that you need to make sure that that is also included in your principle, in your charter, when you are having your DORA framework implemented for your organization. Plus, you need to constantly be in touch with the cybersecurity organization, the privacy organization who are offering services. Of course, PCI DSS, a lot more regulatory, and the cyber service providers as well. Incident management, as I've already emphasized more on that one. Because this is new, you need to give the capsule of training to the members within the European Union, or a third-party service provider who is actually offering services from other third world country. It could be not only within EU region, it could be from UK or India or whatever it is, other than the European Union. You need to emphasize the penalty clause first, because you may suffer damage. One is that the reputational damage, and then you may probably suffer consequential loss as well if you are not following the guidelines as dictated by DORA. So every member in the organization, whether you're an ICT service provider or a critical service provider, would have to understand this, so that you reduce the risk of being penalized by the financial entity or by the DORA supervisor authority. And of course, you need to find out where you are and you can only do that by doing a test and drill, which is mandated by the supervisor authority as per DORA Act. This is a high-level step. Whatever I've explained is, I'm talking about forming a governance committee. Then you're trying to establish a policy and procedure, just like your DRBCP as well. And then you define the incident response plan and the framework. You do a test. You do a business impact analysis. Based on that, you try and find out your recovery point and recovery time objective, and then find out whether I can refine that over a period of time by doing frequent builds. And then also do the third-party risk assessment, find out what are the gaps that you probably have, and then try and bring them on board, educate them. If you think some of the contracts would have to be amended to reflect the DORA clause, you may have to do that. They could be part of your existing contractors who's offering support. You may have to tweak the contract. If they're going to be onboarding a new customer, you need to include all the DORA Act and clauses into the new customer. There are occasions that some customers will not be able to comply, so they may probably not want to be part of the services that you're already providing to the financial entity. Situation could be like that, or you need to really scale up to ensure that you're able to still offer the services to the financial entity and yet don't get penalized. So those are the things that the service would have to have in mind. Of course, the training is pretty important. You set the KPIs. The margin of the KPIs have to be really very high because the penalty value is there. So everyone would have to know what they need to do for their client, which is the financial entity, and ensure if they are not able to make it, they communicate to the financial entity. And then if there is any leeway that they can make it, but yet ensure that they follow the compliance set or the regulation set of DORA. And of course, there is a regulatory audit that DORA may do it on the ICT as well as with financial entities, they definitely do it. And for the ICT critical service provider, they may do a regulatory audit using any third-party companies that they nominated or they have empaneled with. Right. And then, of course, policy updation, which is very, very critical because the scope may change for an organization. They would have merged, they would have, there could be an amalgamation, there could be demerger or merger, whatever it is. Those would have to reflect in your resilience policy and resilient governance framework. So this is the 9 steps are very, very important when you implement DORA in your organization.
Mr. Ganesh, can I ask you a question?
Yes, please, sir.
Thank you. See, the DORA committee, you also explained. There is a mention about resilience test. Okay. What way the BCP committee is different from DORA? Is there any overlap between these two? That's not clear to me. If you can throw some light, that would be nice.
No.
And also in a financial industry, when everything is critical, how do you do a resilience test? These two questions just came up to my mind that I'm checking with you.
Yeah, so the acronym like a DRBCP and the resilience from the technology point of view, I would say it's one and the same. It is only they've used the resilience because once when you take the data from a primary to a backup site and then ensure that the sanity of the data when you're actually bringing back to the primary site is the same, so that you need to do the sanity check. So those are the key mechanisms that they have looked into. As the second point of your question is that, yes, in a financial entity, everything is very, very critical. But all they are trying to say is that they do not want the customer to suffer any disruption. To enhance the service that is offered to the customers, like banking or non-banking or insurance, they would want to find out whether you are able to identify the right critical service provider. And are they at par with you to offer? Are they like a partner with you to offer jointly the services that you need to render to your client? So that is the key. That's the reason why they have given a lot of emphasis onto the infrastructure point of view, as well as from the cybersecurity point of view. However good you may, there are possibilities of a cyber threat. So how updated is your organization to curb any cyber, threats or any espionage or sabotage, which could probably likely to disrupt your normal operation. So with the onset of AI threats, a lot of tools are being released in the market where the AI is actually doing the DDoS attack. You don't have to have anyone sitting there. So you need to have a counter AI mechanism. So are you engaging such service providers? Or is the existing service provider, do they have the capability to identify those threats in the infrastructure as well as remediate them? And if at all they are not able to remediate, what are the other risks that they need to bring into table is what will be discussed and debated. So this is an ongoing exercise. That is exactly what they're trying to address. So it could be a sabotage, cyber sabotage attack at one branch in European Union, but are you still able to render services to those areas where the services got disrupted, irrespective of the time that you're going to take the recovery from the normal disruption of technology as well as disruption through cyber attack is what they are looking into on a high level.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, I have one more question, sir.
Please.
So, for identifying these gaps.
So I couldn't quite get you. Can you repeat the question for me, please?
So how frequently we are testing that environment? As you said, right, financials are critical, right? So we need to run the scheduled task. For example, we have a tabletop exercise every 3 months or every 6 months. How frequently we are doing this exercise?
Yeah. So this is going to vary from organization to organization based on the criticality, right? For example, that's the reason why they say you do a constant monitoring. If you are under a frequent attack, or if there is a frequent disruption of a particular set of services that you are feeling, then it is quite likely that you need to have a frequent drills to identify what there are, and then put the control mechanism in place till you have a comfort feeling to run the operation without any disruption. So it could be initially pretty frequent, but once when you have a threshold identified, then the organization or the management or the governance framework that you set initially, you could relax. I wouldn't say use the word relax. You could measure that, and then you could adequately put your testing drills. For financial entities, it could be as frequent as once in a quarter, but that is only based on the industrial experience. But it is more likely if you are a frequent threats to your network or to your services, then you need to roll up your sleeves and do something about it.
Okay, thanks, sir.
So this could be a repetitive of the slide that I've already explained. So I'm just going to skip that. It talks about the risk identification, impact analysis, like you do the BIA, the control measures, why monitoring is all important and things like that. So I'm just going to skip it because this is probably a lift and shift from the ISO, DRBCP, and it's got a direct bearing from the DORA as well. Yeah. And when it comes to the incident reporting, just like the regular incident reporting for cyber incident and privacy incident, this is almost the same that you actually do, but there is a set of documentation that has been mandated by the DORA committee that you need to follow this principle or this framework or this methodology to submit the incident. Interestingly, what happens to the supervisory authority is that every financial entity are subject to submit yearly report, and they also have to disclose the service provider with whom they work with, right? So if you imagine that all this financial entity are going to submit the reports of the service provider and the supplier to the supervisory authority, the supervisory authority gets a bird's eye view of the total number of third-party suppliers, and then they are able to visualize the quantum of penetration that they have in the market. So then they identify, yes, they are offering to more than like 300 financial entities, so they become very critical. Some could be less critical, and some could be not at all critical. So they have a bird's eye view, and then that's the reason why they have a direct governance into the critical ICT provider. So for that, they have to really rely on the financial entity. And of course, they have the governance framework. They can knock on the door to find out who offers critical. They have multiple mechanisms to do that. But the easiest mechanism, because they get it from the financial entity reporting. So the incidents that they identify and why it has happened, is it because of the non-cooperation on non-resilience framework adapted by the third party? They will be able to grasp from the incident reporting, and those will be facilitated by the financial entity to the supervisory authority. So these are, at the moment, this is going to get refined. Of course, this is an act. You may see a refinement of the act. It could probably get a little bit more stringent as it goes. But as of now, they have made sure that by the 17th of January 2025, that they need to have things in place for both the financial entities as well as the ICT critical and non-critical service provider. Yeah, the monitoring and testing, as I told you, there was a good question that was asked: how frequently should you do? It is generally there is no specific yardstick, because it directly based on the risk and the vendor risk that you, or third-party risk that you do. You weigh it you put a mitigation, you put the risk factor, and if it falls within the criticality, then you define how frequent you need to do this. But at least a minimum once a year, which is definitely required. So you take a close call, because there's a fine imposed if something happens to you. It is better to have drill conducted so that people work towards it. They get acclimatized. They also know how to handle situation, there's a calling tree, and all this principle. So they have a ready reckoner, just on a war footing, they know what needs to be done. And if everybody is on the same page, it becomes easy for the organization to run through this resilience program. So it is very, very important. You could engage a third party also to do that on behalf of the financial entity. Or if you're an ICT service provider, you can do an internal audit, or you can do the second party audit from companies which has the knowledge to do the ISO DRBCP or the third party risk assessment. You can engage them, and then you get the first line, because you know what services that you're offering to the financial entity. You get a bird's eye view, you get a clear idea, and then if there is any missing controls, you can definitely implement it well before the supervisor authority knocks at your door and asks you to do something. So you could do that. It's the best way to identify, self-identify, and then find where you are, and then offer the service to the financial entity. So, yeah, as I told you, there could be a possibility of any third-party service provider operating out of India, or could be Philippines, non-European entity. They may be working with the financial entity as of today. It could be a three years contract or a 5 years contract that they probably got engaged into. But once when this DORA requirements gets into the contract, you may have to waive. You may have to do a waiver to find out, is it viable for us to continue with the services, because the penalty clauses may worry you. So you need to really work, is it good for us to continue with this engagement? Or if you want to bite the bullet and continue, you may have to ensure that all the DORA's requirements are met. So you need to anyway spend money wherever, if at all, if required, you need to spend the money. So a word of caution is that for existing contractors and service providers operating out of India or from anywhere, it is equally important that go through, your legal team would have to really help them. The technical team would probably not be able to read between the lines because of the way the DORA regulations are. So the legal team would have to really help the master service agreement from the technical team, which may put in place, and then find out whether it is viable for you to still continue. And if you think it is good for you, and if there is an incentive for you to continue to the financial entity, I think you should go ahead and do that. So that is very, very clear. Of course, you do a risk assessment, even for ensuring that you accept the clause and conditions that have been put forward by the financial entity. Of course, this is something that is required if you are a critical service provider for the financial entity. As I told you, you are directly under the governance. You get into the control of the supervisor authority. You have the power, or you have the ability to check what is required. If you need some help from the supervisor authority, you can definitely go and ask them. They are not going to refrain you from asking questions. Adequacy of the control, if you are not very clear on the contractual clauses, the supervisor authority has got a forum where you can actually go and ask for help for any clarity by mentioning that these are the services that you offer. Is it okay? I have A, B, C, D. And that is something that you need to do because it's just not only for the digital resilience, but in the event of any incident, cyber incident, you need to know from the security and privacy angle what needs to be. So you can always approach the supervisor authority of the European Union and then get your answer queried and then find out what needs to be implemented. But there is no dilution of the process, unfortunately, here, because it is a regulation. You need to follow what needs to be followed. Yeah. So the DORA, before DORA came into picture 2 years ago, there was this Network and Information Security version 1, and then the Network and Information Security version 2, which was prevalent in the European Union. And of course, there is a UK Resilience Act as well, but it may not be applicable for the European Union. More or less, if you look into it, all falls into the broader category. But going forward, you cannot claim saying that I've got already NIS 2. Can I get lenience from not implementing DORA? But that's not the case. Going forward, even if you have NIS 2 implemented, you need to confirm and comply with DORA. Even though you find similarities between these two, you need to comply with DORA, and that's a yardstick for any financial entity operating out of the European Union. So this is something that I wanted to project. And as I told you, there is a UK resilience as well, but that is now limited to the UK after the Brexit. So European Union, DORA is mandatory. They need to follow. And if you happen to be a service provider for the financial entities operating in the European Union, you are directly under the control of the DORA committee. So I think within the limited time, this is what I thought I will, disseminate whatever I knew a little about DORA. So if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take those questions at this point in time.
Yes, this is Pradeep here. Hi, Ganesh. Thanks for all your slides, and it was really informative. One of my customer, let's assume they have a product and they have already, and they have their customers in European Union as well. And they have already completed ISO 27001 audit and BCP as well and GDPR as well. So is it mandatory for them to again undergo this DORA Act with all the documentation purposes, and they have to do an internal audit as well as an external audit as well?
Is that product being used in any of this financial entity in the European Union?
Yes.
In the banks and the financial entities, is it?
It's not in the bank. Okay. Maybe it's a small product. Okay, maybe used in any of the e-commerce related thing, or I'm not sure whether it is used in banks or financial.
Yeah, banks, non-banking financial entities, insurance, anything that would probably affect the public, instantaneously, and that is why we need to quantify. But is this a SaaS product that you did you say SaaS product?
Yeah, it's a SaaS product.
Okay, and they are operating out of India, is it?
Their base location is in India, but their products are being sold across the globe and even in European Union as well.
Okay, we need this. Maybe the information that you gave me is quite insufficient for me to find out whether they need to do that. I need to take it offline. Two things is that if the product becomes part of the critical ICT service provider, it could be, as I told you, it could be software, SaaS providers, cloud service providers, whatever it is. If they happen to be, by this time, the entity to which they are servicing, they would have given a mandate to them already. Or if they do not know, then they need to know. So we can take this a little offline, and then I'll be able to get a few more information from them directly, and then I can probably guide them what they need to do.
Okay, sure, Ganesh. Thanks for all your inputs.
But having said that, see, the product are not going to get stagnated. Once when they start selling the product for one financial entity, they're going to upgrade the product. It may get into the criticality. So they can probably gear up themselves for this DORA, because that's going to really help them in future. Second thing is that if you come under the purview of the critical infrastructure services, you necessarily have to have an office established in the European Union. That is a mandate of DORA. You simply cannot sit in India and do anything. So once when you go identify yourself as a critical service provider for the financial entity, you have to have an office established, because then you will get governed by the supervisory authority, and all the DORA principle comes into place. So we need to look into whether that is required. And of course, there is an internal audit, the revenues and all we need to look into. But I can probably take this a little offline. Definitely, I can help you.
Sure, Ganesh. Thanks for all your inputs. It was an excellent and wonderful session. It threw lights for every one of us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So Okay, if there is no questions, and if you have any questions after the session, you can probably
Maybe
write
we
to-
can come up. I can come up with one more question.
Please, sir.
You already touched upon that briefly. So, if you look at the security controls and the BCP, DORA, I mean, I also see that with the AI, rolling out, companies exploring AI rollout. AI management system and governance framework, exactly it reflects based on the same triangle. I see the European Union Parliament Act and then, ISO 2001 Act have similar controls put in place. They are again, I mean, same type of, a management committee for AA governance, AA management system, and things like that. So when there are so many legislations like this, getting the bandwidth of the senior management, the management committee would be very difficult. How do you really effectively manage with so many compliances?
So, yeah, I think that's a very good question. I will take that. So one is that the business proportion, you need to value the business proportion because you're offering services to your end client, which is probably, people at large, right? It could be demographically, if you say they could be patients for you, if it's going to be insurance, there could be people who are investing in a bank, they're investors for you. So you look into those aspects of it. And if you want to stay in the business, you do not have a choice at this point in time because you are bombarded with so many threats and vulnerabilities. So they wanted to find out just not, like a fly-by-night operators, there are a lot of companies just sprung up without any, ethics, So they want to get these well bounded to make sure an organization which exists in the market, which is going to serve their clients, people, have got some regulation. They need to have a regulation in place. Otherwise, things would fall out of control. Having said that, yes, the senior management, it is going to be very, very difficult for a senior management with so many things, but you need to take it with a pinch of salt because you need to still, coexist with these and then render services to the client. So that is hypothetically, yes, you may have to. Of course, you have the best thing is that European Union is not putting a gap that it has to be only your in-house employee who has to be governing this. You have a lot of consultants to offer these kind of services. In fact, for the CISO, Mr. Subramaniam from ISSS, he's been offering vCISO services or fragmented CISO services and privacy services as well. So you bring in the domain expert as and then that is required to make sure. Once when it becomes part of your organization, then you don't need, because that will be part of your organization, like by default, security by default and privacy by design. It becomes a culture. Till it becomes a culture, yes, it is going to be difficult. Once when it is part of a culture, just like you get up in the morning and brush your teeth, and that will probably happen whether you like it or not, everybody will follow. But there is a good amount of investment of time in people is required. And you can anticipate more when it comes to AI. I'm not touching anything on AI today. And it is you can expect more from AI. We are just only looking at the tip of the iceberg. With AI, you expect more. There's a lot of, in fact, EU has also got an AI Act, if you know. Such acts are going to be coming. Only India now, they are looking at the Privacy Act to be released probably after the Mumbai election. There has to be something like AI for India. Similarly for other regions as well. So you are going to be bombarded, but you need to take it. Okay, I think I did overshoot my time. I extremely apologize. I know it's a long day, but I really want to thank everybody for your patient listening. As I told you, this is just only an overview. What I've actually presented is from the DORA website and looking at the articles. I'm not a legal counsel, though. I'm not able to interpret more onto the legal aspect of it, but I would request everybody to validate what I've told. If you have a legal counsel to help you with that, it will be good to take that perspective also from the legal counsel, and then you can come into perspective. But from the technical aspect of it, I've covered on a high level, but there is a lot to learn. I'm still learning from people like Subramaniam and other leaders who have really helped me to understand the nuances of security and privacy. It's a long journey though, but we have just started here. So thanks for your time. Looking forward for any questions if you all have, you can route it through to Ms. Kavita and Mr. Subramaniam. I'll be more than happy to help you. Thank you.
Mr. Ganesh, thanks again for taking up the DORA webinar. We would like to extend a sincere gratitude for agreeing to present the webinar on the Digital Operational Resilience Act. Your expertise and insights will undoubtedly provide valuable knowledge to our attendees. Thanks, attendees, as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ganesh.
Thank you.
Thank you.